Dust swirled across the hard-packed dirt of Cottonwood Springs, a small settlement nestled in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains. The year was 1878, and Silas Morgan stood on the weathered platform of the train station, his calloused hands fidgeting with the brim of his worn Stetson. At 45, the lines etched into his sun-weathered face told stories of harsh winters, brutal summers, and the unforgiving life of a cattle rancher in Wyoming Territory. His eyes, sharp and blue as a winter sky, scanned the approaching train with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Today was the day his mail-order bride would arrive from Boston, and Silas had convinced himself he needed nothing more than a practical woman to help manage his growing ranch. Someone sturdy, capable, and undemanding. The whistle of the train pierced the air as it rounded the bend, belching black smoke against the vast, blue canvas of the western sky. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. I'd love to know what city you're watching from. "Damn fool thing to do," muttered Jackson Wheeler, the local blacksmith, who had accompanied Silas to the station. "Mail-order bride from back east? She'll take one look at your place and be on the next train heading east." Silas ignored the commentary, though a muscle twitched along his jawline. The success of his ranch had made him one of the wealthier men in the territory. But wealth meant little without someone to share it with. After 15 years of solitude, following the death of his first wife during childbirth, a loss that had taken their infant son as well, Silas had finally admitted to himself that the emptiness of his home was becoming unbearable. The advertisement had been straightforward. Established rancher seeks practical wife for partnership in Wyoming Territory. Comfortable living guaranteed. The reply from Miss Catherine Blackwood had been equally plain, describing herself as 28, educated, capable of hard work, and seeking new beginnings. The correspondence that followed had been brief and businesslike, and Silas had sent train fare with his final letter, instructing her to arrive on the first Tuesday of May. The train screeched to a halt, steam hissing from its steel joints as passengers began to disembark. Silas straightened his best shirt, still rough and worn compared to Eastern standards, and tried to swallow past the unexpected lump in his throat. A well-dressed gentleman stepped down first, followed by a traveling salesman Silas recognized from previous visits to town. Then came a young family, the children wide-eyed at their new surroundings. Silas began to worry that perhaps she had changed her mind, when suddenly a flash of deep blue caught his eye. A woman descended from the train with a grace that seemed entirely out of place in the rugged frontier town. Catherine Blackwood was nothing like the practical plain woman Silas had imagined from her letters. She stood tall and elegant in a traveling dress the color of twilight, her honey-blonde hair swept up beneath a modest hat that nonetheless failed to diminish her striking features. Silas felt his mouth go dry as their eyes met across the platform. Hers were a startling shade of amber, intelligent and direct in their assessment of him. A small, polite smile curved her full lips as she approached, carrying just one valise while a porter struggled with a trunk behind her. "Mr. Morgan, I presume?" Her voice carried no trace of the Boston accent he had expected, instead flowing like warm honey with just a hint of something else, perhaps Virginia or Carolina in her background. Silas could only nod, suddenly acutely aware of the dirt under his fingernails and the patches on his best coat. Catherine extended a gloved hand, which he took awkwardly, nodding instead of attempting words that seemed to have deserted him entirely. Up close, her beauty was even more disarming. Not the fragile porcelain beauty of sheltered Eastern women, but something more complex, with character in the slight crinkles at the corners of her eyes and determination in the set of her jaw. "Well, ain't you gonna say something, Morgan?" prompted Wheeler, his usual gruffness tinged with amusement at his friend's discomfort. Silas cleared his throat, finally finding his voice as he released Catherine's hand. "Miss Blackwood, welcome to Wyoming territory. I hope your journey was comfortable." The inadequacy of his greeting hung in the air between them. Catherine's smile deepened slightly, revealing a surprising dimple in her right cheek. "The journey was long, Mr. Morgan, but not unpleasant. I've been looking forward to seeing the country you described in your letters." Her gaze swept the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs, taking in the saloon, general store, and scattered buildings that comprised the settlement. If she was disappointed, she hid it well behind that composed smile. Silas nodded again, gesturing awkwardly toward his wagon. "We should get your belongings loaded. It's an hour's ride to the ranch, and I'd like to arrive before dark." As they made their way toward his wagon, Silas could feel the eyes of the townsfolk upon them. Cottonwood Springs had its share of women, wives of shopkeepers, a few schoolteachers, and the girls who worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon. But Catherine Blackwood was something different altogether. She moved with a confidence that suggested education and breeding, yet there was nothing fragile or helpless about her. Silas helped her up onto the wagon seat, conscious of the delicate strength in her waist as he lifted her. Once her trunk was secured in the back, he climbed up beside her, painfully aware of the proper distance he maintained between them on the seat. "Your letters didn't mention much about yourself beyond the practical matters," Silas said as he flicked the reins, urging his team of horses forward. "I know you're educated. Were you a teacher back east?" Catherine adjusted her skirts, her gloved hands folding neatly in her lap. "I was for a time. I taught at a ladies' seminary in Boston for 6 years." There was something careful in the way she offered the information, as though selecting which parts of her past to share. "Before that, I lived with my family in Virginia. My father was a judge before the war." The way she said "the war" told Silas everything he needed to know. Like many who had come west after 1865, Catherine Blackwood was leaving behind the shattered remains of a Southern heritage. "The war changed everything, of course. My brothers did not return. My parents passed within a year of each other after we relocated to Boston. I continued teaching until—" She paused, her expression unreadable. "Until circumstances made a change necessary." Silas nodded, understanding that some stories took time to tell. He had his own collection of silences, after all. As the wagon rolled out of town and into the open country, he found himself stealing glances at his bride-to-be's profile. In his letters, he had described the land, the ranch, the work required, but he had said little about himself beyond the necessary facts. Now, faced with this unexpected woman, he felt oddly vulnerable, as though he had somehow misrepresented himself. "My ranch isn't what you'd call fancy," he said finally. "The house is solid, 4 rooms downstairs, 2 up. I built it myself, added to it over the years. There's a good kitchen, a root cellar. The barn's new, finished it last fall. 200 head of cattle, growing every season." He was babbling now, listing his assets like a merchant taking inventory. "What I mean to say is it's a good life. Hard work, but good." Catherine turned those amber eyes on him, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. Mr. Morgan, Silas, I didn't come west expecting luxury. I came for a new beginning, same as you offered. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it, a determination, perhaps even a desperation that resonated with him. I understand what a partnership means. I'm not afraid of hard work or isolation, and I honor the arrangement we've made through our correspondence. The formal way she referenced their agreement, essentially a business arrangement, culminating in marriage, should have reassured him. Instead, it made him increasingly aware of how unprepared he was for a woman like Catherine Blackwood. He had expected practical, not beautiful, capable, not elegant. He had expected someone whose presence would ease his loneliness without disrupting the careful emotional walls he had built around himself. The land opened up before them as they crested a small rise, revealing the valley where Silas had built his kingdom. The main house stood proudly on a gentle slope, smoke curling from the chimney where Mrs. Gunderson, his housekeeper who came in 3 times a week, would have prepared a welcome meal. Behind it stretched the barn, corrals, and bunkhouse where the 3 hired hands lived during the busy seasons. Beyond that, grassland rolled toward distant mountains, dotted with the dark shapes of cattle. It was beautiful in its wild simplicity, and Silas felt a surge of pride as he always did when approaching from this vantage point. "There it is," he said, unnecessarily. "Morgan Ranch." He watched Catherine's face carefully, looking for signs of disappointment or regret. Instead, he saw her eyes widen slightly, a genuine smile softening her features as she took in the vista before them. "It's magnificent," she breathed, and Silas was startled by the authenticity in her voice. "You've built something remarkable here." Her genuine appreciation warmed something in Silas that had been cold for far too long. As they continued down toward the ranch house, Catherine asked intelligent questions about the operation. Water sources, grazing patterns, the seasonal rhythms of ranching life. Each question revealed not just politeness, but a sincere interest that surprised him. By the time they reached the house, Silas had begun to relax marginally, though the unexpected beauty and sophistication of his bride-to-be still left him feeling oddly out of step, as though he had ordered cotton and received silk. As he helped her down from the wagon, their eyes met briefly, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. For just a moment, he glimpsed something vulnerable beneath her composed exterior, a flash of uncertainty that matched his own. Mrs. Gunderson emerged from the house as they approached, her round face alight with curiosity. The older woman had been not so subtly hinting for years that Silas needed a wife, and her expression as she assessed Catherine was a mixture of approval and surprise. "So you're the bride from back east? Land's sakes, Mr. Morgan didn't tell me he was bringing home such a beauty." Catherine smiled warmly at the housekeeper, extending her hand. "Mrs. Gunderson, I presume? I'm Catherine Blackwood. It's a pleasure to meet you." Silas watched as the 2 women sized each other up, relieved when Mrs. Gunderson's face settled into a welcoming smile. "Well, come on in then. I've prepared a proper welcome supper, and you must be tired from your journey. We've made up the spare room for you until the wedding." The reminder of their impending marriage hung in the air between Silas and Catherine as they followed Mrs. Gunderson into the house. The interior of Morgan Ranch was unexpectedly welcoming. Simple but well-crafted furniture, polished wooden floors covered with woven rugs, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the main room. Catherine moved slowly through the space, her eyes taking in details. Books stacked beside a comfortable chair, landscape paintings on the walls, a fine clock ticking steadily on the mantel. "Your home is lovely," she said quietly, removing her gloves and hat. Without these accessories, in the warm light of the house, she looked younger and somehow more vulnerable. Silas nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond to the genuine appreciation in her voice. Mrs. Gunderson bustled about, showing Catherine to the spare bedroom where she could freshen up before supper, leaving Silas alone with his thoughts. He moved to the sideboard and poured himself a small measure of whiskey, downing it in one swallow. The burn in his throat matched the unsettled feeling in his chest. When Catherine returned for the meal, she had changed from her traveling clothes into a simpler dress of deep green that nonetheless accentuated her figure in ways that made Silas fumble with his fork. Mrs. Gunderson had outdone herself with the welcome supper: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Silas had expected, with Catherine asking thoughtful questions about the ranch and the town. "Reverend Caldwell comes through on the second Sunday of each month," Silas explained as they discussed the wedding arrangements. "He'll be here in 10 days. I thought, that is, if it suits you, we could have the ceremony then. Simple. Just us and a few neighbors as witnesses." He watched her carefully as he laid out this plan, half expecting her to balk at the hastiness or simplicity of the arrangement. Instead, Catherine nodded, a practical light in those remarkable eyes. "That seems sensible. It will give me time to learn the workings of the household and meet some of the community before we formalize our arrangement." There was that careful phrasing again, reminding Silas that whatever else she might be, Catherine Blackwood was approaching their marriage as the business partnership they had agreed upon in their letters. Mrs. Gunderson, who had been listening with undisguised interest, gave a small harumph of approval. "Well, I'd best be getting home before dark. Mr. Morgan, you remember what we discussed about propriety. Miss Blackwood, it was a pleasure. I'll be back day after tomorrow to help you get settled proper-like." With that parting reminder, which brought an unexpected flush to Silas's weathered cheeks, the housekeeper gathered her things and departed, leaving the soon-to-be-married couple alone in the suddenly quiet house. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Silas cleared his throat, searching for safe conversation. "Would you care for coffee? Or perhaps tea? I keep both, though I'm partial to coffee myself." Catherine smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." As Silas busied himself with the pot on the stove, Catherine moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers lightly along the spines. "You have quite a collection for a rancher in Wyoming territory," she observed, no judgment in her tone, merely curiosity. Silas glanced over his shoulder, watching as she selected a volume of Emerson essays. "Reading passes the winter evenings," he replied simply. "Not much else to do when snow blocks the passes and the cattle are bedded down." "My father had a library twice this size," Catherine said softly, replacing the book carefully. "It was sold to pay debts after his death. I managed to save only a few volumes." There was a story there, Silas sensed, one of many that lay beneath her composed surface. As he brought 2 cups of coffee to the table, he found himself wanting to know those stories, to understand what had brought this educated, elegant woman to seek a marriage with a stranger in the wilderness. They sat across from each other, the steam from their cups rising between them, like the questions neither was quite ready to ask. "Tomorrow, I'll show you around the ranch properly," Silas said, after a moment. "Introduce you to the hands. They're good men, reliable." Catherine nodded, her fingers wrapped around the warmth of her cup. "I'd like that. And perhaps you could show me the kitchen garden Mrs. Gunderson mentioned. I've some experience with herbs and vegetables. Practical topics carried them through another half-hour of conversation before Catherine stifled a yawn behind her hand. "Forgive me," she said. "The journey has been long." Silas immediately stood, awkwardly formal. "Of course. You must be exhausted. Your room is prepared, and there's a washstand with fresh water." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall upstairs." Catherine rose gracefully, gathering her composure around her like a cloak. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Morgan. Good night." As she passed him on her way to the spare room, her scent, something subtle like lavender and clean linen, caught him unexpectedly, stirring something long dormant within him. Silas remained standing in the main room long after her door had closed, staring into the dying fire and wondering what madness had possessed him to think he could bring such a woman into his life without consequence. Morning brought clarity and purpose, as it often did for Silas. He rose before dawn, completing his usual chores before returning to the house to find Catherine already awake, her hair braided simply down her back, wearing a practical dress of blue cotton. She had coffee brewing and was examining the pantry contents with a thoughtful expression. "Good morning," she said, turning at his entrance. "I hope you don't mind my taking the liberty of exploring the kitchen." Silas shook his head, oddly pleased to find her so at ease in his home. "Not at all. Will be, your house too." Breakfast was a simple affair of eggs and leftover bread from the previous night. But the domesticity of sharing the meal stirred something in Silas's chest, a dangerous warmth he had not allowed himself to feel in 15 years. As they ate, he outlined the day's plan to show her the ranch operations, relieved to focus on practical matters rather than the confusing emotions her presence evoked. The tour of Morgan Ranch revealed more surprises about Catherine Blackwood. Despite her refined appearance, she showed no hesitation in entering the barn or corrals, asking knowledgeable questions about livestock management that betrayed a background more diverse than her Boston teaching position would suggest. "My grandfather raised horses in Virginia," she explained when Silas commented on her ease around the animals. "I spent summers there as a child." The ranch hands, Joe Callahan, a grizzled veteran of the frontier, Ethan Foster, a young man learning the trade, and Miguel Vasquez, whose skill with horses was unmatched, regarded Catherine with varying degrees of surprise and approval. By midday, when they paused for a simple lunch under the shade of a cottonwood tree overlooking the eastern pasture, Silas found himself watching Catherine with growing confusion. She was clearly educated and refined, yet demonstrated practical knowledge and an apparent comfort with the rustic conditions of frontier life. "You're wondering why someone like me would agree to marry a stranger in Wyoming territory," Catherine said suddenly, her direct gaze catching him off guard. The question had indeed been circling in his mind, though he hadn't intended to ask it so bluntly. Silas nodded slowly, his hat in his hands, as they sat on a rough blanket spread over the grass. Catherine looked out over the pasture land, seeming to gather her thoughts. "The simple answer is that I had few options remaining in Boston. Teaching positions for women are limited, and the pay barely sustains a modest living. With no family left." She paused, something flashing across her expression too quickly for Silas to interpret. "But the true answer is more complex. I was engaged before, to the son of a prominent Boston family. When my parents died and our financial circumstances changed, his family pressured him to break the engagement." Silas listened quietly, recognizing the cost it took for her to share this history. Catherine continued, her voice steady, though her hands twisted slightly in her lap. He chose to comply with their wishes. It was a difficult time. Boston society has little forgiveness for a woman who has been jilted, particularly one with Southern roots and diminished circumstances. Your advertisement offered something I needed. A fresh start, far from whispers and pitying glances. A chance to build something meaningful. Her amber eyes met his, direct and challenging. I didn't lie in my letters, Silas. I am practical, educated, and capable of hard work. But I suspect I'm not what you expected either. The honesty of her statement hung in the air between them, demanding equal candor in return. Silas took a deep breath, feeling as though he stood at the edge of a precipice. "No," he admitted quietly. "You're not what I expected. I thought—" He struggled to find words that wouldn't offend. "I thought someone plainer would come. Someone whose presence wouldn't be so distracting, unsettling, dangerous." He couldn't say these things, so instead he gestured vaguely with his hand. Catherine's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "Someone who wouldn't make you feel things you'd rather not feel?" The directness of her observation startled him. This woman saw too much, understood too quickly. Silas looked away, his jaw tightening. "My first wife died in childbirth 15 years ago. Her name was Hannah. Our son died with her." The words came out rough, unpracticed. He rarely spoke of them, keeping their memory locked away where it couldn't hurt him daily. I can't," he broke off, frustrated by his inability to articulate the tangled emotions her presence evoked. Catherine's hand touched his briefly, a gesture of understanding rather than romance. "You wanted a housekeeper with a wedding band, someone to cook your meals and share your bed without disturbing the fortress you've built around your heart." There was no accusation in her tone, merely statement of fact. Silas met her eyes, surprised and somewhat unsettled by her perception. "That sounds worse than I intended it," he said finally. Catherine withdrew her hand, but her expression remained open. "Not at all. It's an honest arrangement. More honest than many marriages based on false sentiment. I came here seeking security and a fresh start. You sought companionship and help managing your home. These are practical concerns, and there's no shame in them." She paused, her gaze direct. "But I think perhaps we should acknowledge that there are complications neither of us anticipated." The complications she referenced hung in the air between them, the unexpected attraction that Silas felt toward her, and the emotional response this beauty stirred in him after years of carefully maintained numbness. He stood abruptly, needing physical movement to process his thoughts. "We should head back. Storms brewing to the west." It wasn't a lie. Dark clouds were indeed gathering over the distant mountains, though they were hours from reaching the ranch. Catherine rose gracefully, brushing grass from her skirt. Of course. As they packed up their simple lunch and mounted their horses, Silas struggled to reconcile the practical partnership he had envisioned with the complex reality of Catherine Blackwood. Her honesty demanded equal honesty from him, yet he wasn't sure he was capable of offering it. The fortress she had so accurately described had protected him for 15 years. To dismantle it now seemed not just frightening, but dangerous. The following days established a cautious rhythm as Catherine settled into life at Morgan Ranch. She proved herself remarkably adaptable, learning the routines of the household and adding her own touches where appropriate. Silas observed with surprise as she established a rapport with Mrs. Gunderson, began expanding the kitchen garden, and even assisted with treating a wounded calf, her sleeves rolled up and hands steady as she applied the poultice Miguel's grandmother had taught him to make. Each revelation about her capabilities both impressed Silas and increased his unease. This woman was not just beautiful, but competent in ways he hadn't anticipated, making it increasingly difficult to maintain the emotional distance he had planned. Evenings were the most challenging, as they shared supper and afterwards sat by the fire, sometimes reading silently, sometimes engaged in conversation that revealed more of Catherine's intelligence and depth. "Tell me about her," Catherine said on the fifth night, looking up from her book as Silas stared into the flames. There was no need to specify whom she meant. Silas's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, his first instincts to refuse, to change the subject, to retreat. But something in Catherine's steady gaze, not pity, but genuine interest, made him hesitate. Hannah was quiet, sweet-natured. "We grew up on neighboring farms in Missouri." The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse. "She loved wildflowers, could name every one. Her father didn't approve of me, thought I was too ambitious, too restless. We married young, came west together after the war." He paused, memories flooding back with surprising vividness. "She was afraid of storms, used to hide under quilts during thunderstorms like a child. Made me laugh." The ghost of a smile touched his lips before fading. "She sounds lovely," Catherine said softly, her expression thoughtful. "She would be proud of what you've built here." Silas looked up, startled by the observation. Most people offered platitudes about Hannah being in a better place, or suggested he'd see her again someday. Catherine's comment was unexpected in its practicality and insight. "Maybe," he acknowledged, "though she never wanted to come west. That was my dream. She followed out of loyalty." The admission cost him something. Acknowledging that his first marriage had involved compromise that perhaps hadn't been entirely fair to Hannah. Catherine nodded, her eyes understanding. "Most lives involve compromise," she said simply. "The question is whether what we gain is worth what we sacrifice." The statement seemed to reference her own journey as much as Hannah's, and Silas found himself wondering again what Catherine had left behind in Boston beyond the failed engagement she had mentioned. As the wedding day approached, tensions grew despite their developing understanding. Silas found himself simultaneously drawn to Catherine and terrified of the feelings she evoked. He began spending longer hours with the cattle, returning to the house only when necessary. Aware that his behavior puzzled and perhaps hurt his bride-to-be, but unable to reconcile his conflicting emotions. 2 days before the Reverend Caldwell was due to arrive, Silas returned from a long day on the range to find Catherine sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. She wore a simple dress of soft yellow, her hair loose around her shoulders, and the sight of her, so perfectly at home on his porch, in his world, stopped him in his tracks. "Silas," she acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Gunderson left a stew keeping warm on the stove. You must be hungry." Instead of responding to her practical statement, Silas found himself asking, "Are you having second thoughts?" The question surprised them both, hanging in the air between them as he remained standing at the bottom of the porch steps. Catherine's expression shifted, surprise giving way to thoughtfulness. "About marrying you?" She considered the question with the directness he had come to expect from her. "No, but I think perhaps you are." Her perception cut through his defenses, as it often did. Silas removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair, searching for words to explain his conflicted emotions. "It's not what you think. I don't regret your coming here." He climbed the steps slowly, settling into the chair beside her, still maintaining a careful distance. "I'm not the man you deserve, Catherine." A small, surprising laugh escaped her. "And what sort of man do I deserve, in your estimation?" The challenge in her tone made him look at her directly. In the fading light, with her hair catching the last rays of sun, she was breathtakingly beautiful. But it was the intelligence and strength in her eyes that truly unsettled him. Someone younger, someone who can give you children, a future, someone whose heart isn't buried in a grave 15 years old. The brutal honesty of his statement surprised even him. Catherine's expression softened, though the strength remained. "I'm 28, Silas, not 18. I've lived enough to know that futures are rarely what we imagine them to be. As for children," a shadow crossed her face, "that may not be possible for me regardless. The illness that took my parents left its mark on me as well." The revelation shocked him, another layer to this complex woman he was beginning to realize he knew very little about. "I'm sorry," he said, inadequately. Catherine shook her head slightly. "It's one of many reasons the arrangement with my former fiancé collapsed. His family wanted heirs." She looked out toward the mountains again, her profile strong against the darkening sky. "I came here with open eyes, Silas. I didn't expect romance or passion. I expected partnership, respect, and perhaps, in time, friendship." Her directness both relieved and challenged him. "And if that's all I can offer?" he asked quietly. Catherine turned to face him fully, her expression serious but not unkind. "Then it would be enough. But I don't think that's all you can offer. I think you're afraid of what else you might feel, and that fear is making you pull away from possibilities neither of us anticipated." The accuracy of her assessment left Silas momentarily speechless. This woman saw through him with disturbing clarity, past the gruff exterior to the conflicted heart beneath. "You deserve more than half a man, Catherine," he said finally. She reached across the space between their chairs, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. "Perhaps, but I've chosen this life, this partnership. The question is whether you can accept that choice without letting fear make decisions for both of us." Her touch was warm through the fabric of his shirt, a connection that felt both comforting and dangerous. Silas covered her hand with his own, rough and calloused against her smoother skin. "I don't want to disappoint you," he admitted quietly. Catherine's smile was gentle but knowing. "Then don't run from me, Silas. That's the only thing that would truly disappoint me now." The day before Reverend Caldwell's scheduled arrival brought unexpected challenges. Dark clouds gathered by mid-morning, and by noon, a spring storm had descended on Morgan Ranch with furious intensity. Rain lashed at the windows, wind howled around the corners of the house, and lightning split the sky with terrifying frequency. Inside, Silas and Catherine worked together to secure the home against nature's assault, checking for leaks, banking the fire against the sudden chill, and preparing lanterns in case the storm knocked down the lines to the small generator that provided minimal electricity to the main house. "The cattle will be fine," Silas assured her, as he returned from a quick check of the barn, soaked despite the oilskin slicker he wore. "They'll find shelter in the lee of the ridges. The horses are settled in the barn, and the hands are securing everything else." Catherine nodded, handing him a towel for his dripping hair. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. They ate a simple supper by lamplight, the electricity having failed As Silas predicted, the atmosphere was oddly intimate, their faces illuminated by the golden glow of oil lamps and the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. "Reverend Caldwell won't make it tomorrow if this continues," Catherine observed, her voice practical, though Silas detected a note of uncertainty beneath it. He nodded, pouring her another cup of coffee. "Likely not. The creek crossings will be flooded for at least a day after rain like this." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. A particularly violent crack of thunder shook the house, causing the lamps to flicker. Catherine flinched slightly, her composure momentarily disrupted. The reaction was so unlike her usual calm that Silas found himself asking, "Are you afraid of storms?" A self-deprecating smile crossed her features. Not usually, but that was quite close. Another thunderclap followed, even louder than the first, and Catherine's hand gripped the edge of the table. Without thinking, Silas reached across, covering her hand with his own. "We're safe here," he assured her. "House has weathered worse." Their eyes met across the table, connection flowing between them in the golden lamplight. For a long moment, neither moved, the simple touch of hands, speaking volumes that words had failed to convey. Then Catherine turned her palm upward, her fingers intertwining with his. The gesture was small but significant, an acknowledgement of the growing bond between them. Silas felt something within him shift, a crack appearing in the walls he had built around his heart. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I should check the windows upstairs," Silas said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "Make sure no rain is getting in." He rose from the table, reluctantly releasing her hand. Catherine nodded, gathering their dishes. "I'll take care of these." As Silas climbed the stairs, he could hear her moving about the kitchen, the domestic sounds oddly comforting against the wild backdrop of the storm. The upstairs windows were secure. The one in the spare bedroom, Catherine's room, had a small leak that he stopped with a folded cloth. As he worked, Silas found himself contemplating the changes Catherine had brought to his carefully ordered existence in just over a week. She had disturbed his equilibrium, challenging his assumptions and stirring emotions he had believed long dead. Yet somehow, the disturbance felt right, as though his life had been too still, too stagnant for too long. When he descended the stairs, he found Catherine in the main room, standing by the window, watching the storm, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Lightning illuminated her profile, revealing an expression of mixed awe and apprehension as she observed nature's fury. Something about her vulnerability in that moment broke through Silas's final reserves. He crossed the room to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "When I first came to this valley," he said quietly, "a storm like this hit during roundup. I was alone, separated from the other men. Spent the night in a shallow cave, watching lightning strike so close it left spots in my vision. Should have been terrified, but instead I felt alive, like I was witnessing something sacred." Catherine turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "There is something sacred about such power," she agreed softly, "beautiful and terrible at once." In the shifting light of storm and lamp, with the barriers between them finally crumbling, Silas saw Catherine not as the threat he had feared, but as the partner he had never dared to hope for, strong enough to match him, perceptive enough to understand him, brave enough to challenge him. Without conscious thought, his hand rose to brush a strand of honey-gold hair from her cheek. Catherine remained still, her eyes steady on his, neither encouraging nor discouraging his touch. "I'm not good with words," Silas said roughly. "Never have been. But I want you to know, I'm glad you came. Not just anyone, but you, Catherine Blackwood. With your books, and your questions, and your way of seeing right through me." A small smile touched her lips, warming her amber eyes. "Even though I wasn't what you expected? Even though I make you fear your own fire, as you put it?" The phrase caught him by surprise. He hadn't realized he had spoken those words aloud, but they were true nonetheless. This woman awakened feelings in him that he had deliberately suppressed for 15 years. Emotions that burned dangerously bright after so long in darkness. "Especially because of that," he admitted. "You deserve a whole man, Catherine, not the half-alive creature I've been. I can't promise I won't stumble. The walls I've built are thick, but I want to try." The admission cost him something, but gave back more. A lightness, a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. Catherine's hand rose to cover his, where it rested against her cheek. "That's all I ask," she said simply, "that we try together." The storm continued to rage outside, but within the walls of Morgan Ranch, something long frozen had begun to thaw, tentative and fragile as spring's first blossom, but undeniably alive. Morning broke clear and clean, the storm having washed the world fresh during the night. Silas rose early as always, moving quietly through the house so as not to wake Catherine. He stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, to survey his domain. Water dripped from eaves and tree branches, puddles dotted the yard, but the damage seemed minimal. A few loose shingles, a section of corral fencing down. The hands were already at work, Miguel and Ethan visible in the distance, repairing the fence line. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility. Behind him, the door opened and Catherine emerged, her hair braided simply down her back, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. "Good morning," she said, coming to stand beside him. Silas noticed she no longer maintained that careful distance between them, her shoulder nearly touching his as they surveyed the aftermath of the storm together. "Creek's too high for the Reverend to cross," Silas observed, nodding toward the swollen waterway visible in the distance. Catherine followed his gaze, nodding her agreement. "We'll need to postpone the wedding." There was a question in her tone, though she didn't voice it directly. Silas turned to face her, finding courage in the clear morning light that had eluded him in the intimate shadows of the previous evening. "Unless," he began, then paused, gathering his thoughts. "Unless you'd prefer not to wait. Judge Thornton in town could perform the ceremony just as legal as the Reverend. We could ride in today, if the road's passable." The suggestion hung between them. More than a practical alternative, an acknowledgement that Silas no longer wanted to delay making Catherine his wife. She studied his face, those perceptive amber eyes seeing more than he said aloud. "Are you certain, Silas?" she asked quietly. "Yesterday you were still having doubts." Silas set down his coffee cup on the porch railing, then gently took hers and placed it beside his. With both hands free, he reached for her, his calloused fingers enfolding hers. "I'm certain of this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm certain that you are more than I dared hope for, Catherine Blackwood. And I'm certain that I don't want to waste another day living half a life when you've offered me the chance at something whole." Color rose in her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady on his. "Then yes," she said simply. "Let's ride to town today." Silas felt a smile break across his face, a full, genuine smile that had been rare for 15 years. Without overthinking, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, in a gesture that was part promise, part benediction. The ride to Cottonwood Springs was challenging, but manageable, the road muddy but passable where it followed higher ground. They arrived by mid-morning, drawing curious glances from townsfolk who had expected them only for supplies later in the week. Judge Thornton, a dignified man in his 60s, who had brought law and order to the territory through sheer force of personality, was surprised, but willing to perform the ceremony immediately. "Been wondering when you'd finally settled down proper, Morgan," he commented, as he retrieved the necessary paperwork. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by noon a modest gathering had assembled in the judge's office. The blacksmith Wheeler and his wife, the shopkeeper, and several other prominent citizens who considered Silas a friend despite his usually solitary nature. Catherine wore her blue traveling dress, the same one she had arrived in just over a week earlier, while Silas had brushed his best coat and donned a clean shirt for the occasion. The ceremony was brief and straightforward, the judge's words formal but heartfelt, as he joined Silas Morgan and Catherine Blackwood in matrimony. When the time came to exchange rings, Silas produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. He had retrieved it from the small strongbox in his bedroom that morning, a decision that felt right in ways he couldn't fully articulate. As he slid the ring onto Catherine's finger, their eyes met, and in that moment, Silas knew with certainty that the walls around his heart had crumbled beyond repair. This woman, his wife, had done what 15 years of solitude could not. She had shown him that it was possible to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. When Judge Thornton pronounced them husband and wife, Silas kissed Catherine with gentle reverence, sealing their partnership with a promise that went beyond the practical arrangement they had initially agreed upon. The small gathering celebrated with a meal at the hotel dining room, the proprietor insisting on providing champagne for the occasion. Toasts were raised, congratulations offered, and through it all, Silas found himself watching Catherine. The grace with which she accepted the community's welcome, the intelligence in her conversations, the occasional glance she cast his way that contained a warmth meant only for him. By mid-afternoon, they were riding back to Morgan Ranch, husband and wife, returning to the home they would now truly share. The spring sun dried the mud on the trail, and the landscape seemed to glow with renewed vitality after the storm. As they crested the rise that offered the best view of the ranch, they paused, their horses standing side by side as they surveyed their domain. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan," Silas said quietly, the name still new and wondrous on his tongue. Catherine's smile held promise and understanding in equal measure. "It's a good name," she said, "and a good home." In her amber eyes, Silas saw the future he had been afraid to imagine, not a replacement for what he had lost, but something new and equally precious. The fire he had feared now warmed him, burning away the last vestiges of the fortress that had protected his wounded heart for so long. As they rode down toward the ranch house, side by side in the afternoon sunlight, Silas Morgan understood that some risks were worth taking, some fires worth embracing. He had expected a simple wife, a practical partnership to ease his solitude. Instead, he had found Catherine, brilliant, beautiful, perceptive Catherine, who had made him fear his own capacity for feeling before showing him that such fear was the only thing truly worth fearing after all. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.